Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Legal HR Summit. The Legal HR Summit is a two-day online event hosted by Ius Laboris, the largest employment law alliance in the world. This session is a part of the Europe bloc and will be followed by other curated sessions of the region. Before we kick off, I would just like to let you know that if you have any questions during this session, you can ask them via the Q&A tab. The panelists will try to answer as many as they can, but they can also get back to you by email after the session. I'm now turning over to Marco Sederi to begin the session. Go ahead, Marco, you're welcome to start.
Thank you, Isadora, and welcome everybody to this panel discussion. As you'll see, the panel, as it is necessary these days, is being held on 4 different screens, broadcasting to other screens you are in front of. That's just a fact, and that's our starting point also for our discussion today, because what we are looking at is a new word. There are plenty of new words being brandished around, and our new word today is gigization. What we look into is how the gig economy model, meaning on-demand economy, which has been discussed in employment law circles, high and low, all over the last few years, has progressed as a business model and how it has impacted traditional businesses. So what we're looking at is the state of the art of the gig economy as we know it. So mainly delivery, but that's just a poster face for it, but more into the model. And then how this is going to impact, if at all, the businesses now that COVID-19 is, among other things, forcing us to change our ways of living, ways of working. Off to the first segment, but first let me introduce the panelists. We have Roman Gil, who's a partner at the Sagardoy law firm, which is the Spanish Ius Laboris firm. We know him, we all know him, and he's gonna lead the first section of our discussion, together with Miguel Ferrer, who's the Public Policy Director at Glovo, a company that needs no introduction in the gig economy and the wider business scenario. They will be looking at the gig economy state of things, both legal and business. I am Marco Sideri. I am a partner at Tofoletto, De Luca Tamayo Soci, which is the Italian Ius Laboris firm. And together with Alessandro Castelli, HR Director at Crédit Agricole Insurance in Italy, we will be looking at the second segment, which is the impact of gig economy model on traditional business. Over to you, Roman, and welcome again, everybody.
Roman, I think you're on mute.
My apologies, this mute thing. Thank you, Marco, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to make your acquaintance, even on this digital mode. I hope in not so long time we will be able to meet in person. In a very few minutes, I wanted to share with you 2 considerations. An initial one, and though I know it's not the main objective of this panel, but I think it could be useful to know about the ongoing discussion about the classification of service renderers through digital platforms. And though I'm quite sure you're all aware, but there are, of course, contradictory decisions in many different countries all over the world. And it's difficult to say what's the tendency, though perhaps I would dare to say that the inclination in most countries is more towards unemployment relationship than the contrary, talking about the judicial decisions, even though then there are many differences in how countries are dealing with that regulation. I'm sure Marco can share more information. For the case of Italy, for example, is very interesting. But please mind that there is a relevant decision by the European Court of Justice issued on April 22nd, 2020, in which the chamber of the European Court of Justice considers a case which is it's a typical case of in this case of a delivery service through platforms, where it is the court considers, and when there are subcontractors or substitutes to perform the service, which in this case the rider has agreed to perform, and one of these riders may accept or not accept various tasks offered by his putative employer. It's discussed whether it's an employer or not, or unilaterally set the maximum number of tasks. And when that service provider may provide his services to any third party, including direct competitors, and when this service provider may fix his own hours of work with its certain parameters, and to tailor the time to suit his personal convenience rather than solely the interests of the putative employer, then that person, and when the independence of that person does not seem to be fictitious, and it is not possible to establish the existence of a relation of subordination, well, that person does not seem to be an employee, a regular employee. The professional, it's more a professional status of another kind. But I'm not going to focus on that, because that's this ongoing discussion about the classification. What we are more here to discuss is, in relation to the current problems with the pandemic, whether the gig economy may be a solution. And by gig economy now, I'm going to focus more on the possibility to render services on an on-demand basis, even if the relationship is of an employment nature. Okay, and leaving that aside, that this is, I insist, under discussion and with contradictory decision, and with a very important one by the European Court of Justice. Well, in this case, in relation to this, I would like to highlight the, in my opinion, relevance of the directive of the European Union, Directive 219/1152, 20 June 2019, on transparent and predictable working conditions in the European Union. This directive needs to be implemented no later than August 1st, 2022. So we are in a very important transitional time during which the different states of the European Union must decide how to implement this directive. And I think it's enormously relevant for the purposes of a gigification, if I may use the term, of the possibility to adapt the service rendering to the demand of special companies, in which this demand is so unforeseeable, so flexible, so voluble in a way that it's absolutely needed for productive and organizational. But that also may be extended to other companies which in these times of uncertainty might be interested in perhaps considering this on-demand kind of work. The directive does not impose a transposition of its terms in which the on-demand work needs to be regulated. But what it makes it, in my opinion, is much easier or even palatable for the union side, how that on-demand regulation of work may be adapted with certain warranties, which is perhaps a little less fearful for the social part than the typical 0 hours contract. In this sense, and it also, and I think it's very much thinking of a more flexible possibility of service rendering, which is alien to the traditional regulation of the employment relationship. And I'd like to very briefly refer to 3 articles in this directive. The first one, in Article 9, talks about parallel employment. In many of our legal system, the typical regulation is that an employee may not compete with through a parallel employment with the activities of her or his main employment. Well, in this case, the directive proposes that member states. Okay, yes, here it is, thank you. First slide. Member states shall ensure that an employer neither prohibits a worker from taking employment with other employees outside the work schedule established with that employer, nor subjects a worker to adverse treatment for doing so. And of course, there may be conditions for incompatibility, restrictions by employers on the basis of objective grounds, health, safety, protection, and so on. But I think it's very interesting, because this is indeed suggesting the possibility that work on demand be made more feasible due to the possibility of the employee of rendering services even for competitors at the same time. So of course there will be some limitations, but this is, I think, an important shift which allows for this adaptability, which is on we will consider, and this flexibility which we'll consider in this session. Next slide, please. Article 10, this is also important because it's a consideration about what's called minimum predictability of work. And it is, again, considering a possibility of this very flexible, where a pattern is entirely or most unpredictable, the work's pattern is entirely or most unpredictable when there is not a predetermined working time. The worker will not be required to work by the employer unless certain conditions are met, which is that the work takes place within predetermined reference hours and days, not specific hours and day, which is, for example, the case in my country, in Spain, which is very inflexible. Now it's within certain, which is a reference time, but then within that reference time, there is, again, a possibility certainly of flexibility. Then the worker is informed by the employer of a work assignment within a reasonable notice period in accordance with national law or collective agreement. And very importantly, when these requirements are met, a worker shall have the right to refuse a work assignment without adverse consequences. I want to highlight how important this is, because of course, typically an employee is under regular or normal or current or typical employee is under the direction of the employer and may certainly not refuse work within his category or typical function. And in this case, it's making something as exceptional as the possibility to refuse or to reject this work within certain conditions, which again opens new spaces for this flexibility and adaptability. And it adds that when member states allow an employer to cancel a work without assignment without compensations, then the states must take the measures necessary to ensure that the work is entitled to compensation if the employer cancels after a deadline the work assignment previously agreed. Then again, what I think this is doing is trying to keeping this possible flexibility in rendering services, also to give some guarantees at the same time, some protection, which is one of the most relevant characteristics of employment law, which these difficulties to adapt the more radical 0 hours contract is as I said before, made more agreeable to the social side. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is, again, very, very interesting. It affects very much the platform economy, but it can go on to, it can be used, I understand, for any kind of employer or other companies. This is the complementary measures, it's called, for on-demand contracts. And as you may read in the slide, it's conditioned to the existence of the use of on-demand or similar employment contracts. But the regulation itself of the directive, I think it's easing or making more politically acceptable the adoption of this on-demand regulation in different countries, because as you will see, gives certain warranties or protection to the social part. And the measures when these regulations of on-demand work are in place are limitations to the use and duration of on-demand or similar employment contracts, a rebuttable presumption of the existence of an employment contract with a minimum amount of paid hours based on the average hours worked during a given period. This, I think it's relevant that it's an average really worked. It's very much first a consideration of what are the real needs, the real average needs, and other equivalent measures to ensure effective prevention of abusive. And then last directive, and I will be done. The last slide possible. Well, no, sorry, that was it. This is a repeated. So in my opinion, I think it's very, very important for all the actors who are involved into the practice of employment and labor law, to be very, very mindful of this possible regulation, and even as far as possible to be present in with our different regulators and governments in order to consider how this could be implemented in order to adapt, especially in these difficult times. Thank you very, very much for the attention. Marco?
Yes, here I am back. There is one question which I'll briefly deal with. Can you repeat the date of the decision of the European Court of Justice?
Yes, of course I can. It's April 22nd, 2020, and the case is number 692/19. The case is known as the Yondell case.
That's good. So the date decision is
Yodel,
done.
sorry, I said Yondell, is Yodel.
Yeah.
Yodel, the Yodel case. The decision is April 22nd, 2020.
That's perfect. And off to Miguel, who's gonna run us through the business side of the gig economy and the wider cultural impact of this model.
Okay, thank you very much, Marco, and thank you for having this opportunity to be with you in this interesting panel. My first disclaimer is that I'm not a labor lawyer, so any kind of technical mistake, please consider my lack of full expertise on this field. And my role in Globo is to try to understand and try to provide or information and or impact in this amazing socio-economic debate. Globo is a platform created in 2015 in Barcelona. We are part of this relevant debate, especially in the south of Europe, where the regulatory and the judicial debate is higher than any other country where we operate. Nowadays, we are operating in 21 countries, and our position is to understand how a company with only 5 years is having this kind of huge impact at different levels. My point about that is that globally, we count with 50,000 couriers working through our platform. We have more than 35,000 restaurants and commerce operating through our platform. So you can imagine that we are not just an app offering multi-category products for customers, for clients. So we do believe that the political, the policy and the regulatory debate that we are facing is quite normal, actually. And according to that, during this year, we experience the type of or the different impacts that the pandemic is having, and how the gig economy and especially the on-demand delivery platforms could play an important role in order to be an essential service, not only for citizens, for final customers, also for gig workers and also for restaurants and local commerce that are relying part of their incomes through us. This situation is very interesting because it's accelerating not only customer behaviors, also the way that companies like us are operating regarding labor conditions, okay? And in this regard, it's quite interesting to follow the work that think tanks and public organizations, academia in general, are having in order to understand how the gig economy is having a response for this phenomenon. And I do believe that although the position of Fair Work Foundation, which is part of Oxford University, has some critical and negative approaches regarding platforms, is quite interesting because they are analyzing how we are innovating our operations and relations with the gig workers. Making this initial introduction, I would like to point out why and how the different public administrations and regulators are facing this debate. And one thing that is important, and one thing that we are learning, is that you could have the regulatory debate that we have in the south of Europe, especially Spain, France, Portugal, and Italy. You could have the European Union conversation, and it's very, very interesting the explanation that we had previously regarding this court resolution from the European Union Court of Justice, because it sets criteria that are going to be very influential for future regulators. And then you have how this is covered from other countries in our experience, East Europe, Africa, Latin America, how we could see that we are not or we are not facing a reputational and negative regulatory debate, okay? Just following the South Europe and the Californian case and the conversation in Europe, at the end, the kind of policy or regulatory response that we are seeing is that many of the regulators are proposing hybrid solutions. When I say hybrid solutions, I said that they are trying to find a middle position between what we understand as employee and what we understand as a self-employee. And I will say that Globo and the rest of our competitors are in that side, saying, okay, we need to create a balance between what we understand as flexible model. That is not, flexibility is not only about the company, it's also about the workers themselves that in many occasions are asking for that. And also a way to respect this capacity of independent work to organize itself together with more rights. And for us, perhaps the French Chart of Rights that has been amended in the last years and the current model that we have in France. The last update from California after the vote of the 22nd proposal in California. The Italian model, which is something in our opinion very innovative because in some way respects a collective bargain agreement model, having the possibility to respect self-employees or putting the self-employee regime within that model, something that is also in a consultation process by the European Commission. And there is a recent case in Australia covering that idea of collective bargain agreements under the self-employed regime. All this kind of disordered explanation that I'm making right now is showing a trend that, in our opinion, could be the future framework for the gig economy, not only thinking in the delivery sector, also thinking in a more wide manner, because at the end, many of the works that nowadays we are considering that are going to be maintained in the future of work debate, considering services, hospitality, homework, all these kind of things, the gig economy is now there. So as much as we could maintain this competitiveness, this digitalization, and this flexibility, I will say that is going to be key. So I'm perhaps ending my intervention, but I will be more than happy to start a dialogue or answering any kind of question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. Very, very interesting. And so we now close our chapter on the gig economy as it is known and debated over the world. And that's gig economy. And enter COVID-19, which is the turning point that brings this need for flexible in many forms to our everyday life, both private life and working life. So we treasure the ideas and the inputs of this first part on a model which is only reliant on on-demand work and looking for a place maybe in the wider employment scenario. And we move to work as a general concept and employment as a general concept. In order to start this, let's have a very quick poll amongst viewers about the concept of flexible and the change that COVID-19 brought to your perception of flexible. Let's not get technical now, maybe later, just a tiny bit. Let's start from this. Do you feel that COVID-19 changed your relationship with the workplace? And do you think flexibility should apply more in a prospective way to employees or employers? So let's have a look at the answers and then start our discussion. We have a landslide. Well, the first question is a 100%. So if it was an election, the United Nations would take a look into this very, very closely. Do you feel that it changed the relationship with the workplace? Yes, that's a good news. We have something in common all around Europe, all around the world. Usually we don't, and we know we have different regulators and different rules. On this, we all agree something is changed, and is changed with regards to the workplace. Do you think flexibility should apply more to employees or employers? And here we have a vast majority of answers that point to employees. So employees should be flexible. And this, in a way, validates our general thinking for this panel. So how to take the gig economy model and incorporate this in the traditional business. I will try to have a very, very general introduction and then hand it over to Alessandro, who's gonna report us from the business side, so from experience. One thing that is very bad for lawyers is when everyone agrees, okay? And apparently we all agree on general framework for our difficult times. So flexible and more flexible is needed. That's the starting point. Flexibility is something that was looming, remote working, smart working, flexible arrangement, working time regulation. We've all debated this. Now they are a reality, and they are the starting point from new opinions and new proposals that we are seeing. The other element, so flexible is a given. There is no going back from flexible because we're forced to do that. The other item is place of work. Place of work is a concept that's changing. It is changing from a practical perspective. So companies are looking into their places of work, are changing them according to the new needs, and employees have different places of work. Today, I am at the firm. Yesterday, this would have been my kitchen. So, and I would have been working all the same. I've had meetings. And if you asked me 1 year ago, working from a kitchen meant being at home, sick, or in another state. Now it's a reality. If the place and the flexible are changing, we need rules for this to change. And rules can come either from laws or from contracts, or from both in our case. So we have a common quest for new rules about the workplace. And we are looking at a task-based reasoning rather than a time-based reasoning. Those are the, let's say, the points in the map. They're not the answers. They don't even look like answers, but clearly they are the drivers in our discussion. One thing that is sure is that within employment and within employment law, there is the possibility of managing flexible. That has been tried many times, and there are signs, many of which were mentioned by Roman and Miguel, that task-based assessment of work and task-based organization of work is coming to our collective feelings and our collective consciousness. We do not have a category for that yet. And many systems, including the Italian one, are struggling with flexible. They have a very clear idea of where to get. It's like reading a book from the last page, but more confused ideas about how to get there. So this could come from either a collective effort, maybe at European level, or national efforts. Another last question mark, and I'm sorry to be providing question mark, that's another thing that a lawyer should not do and tries not to do when working, but if we don't ask question before, then the answer will be faulty as a necessary consequences. So the other question is how do we consider and how do we treat the relationship? So is there somewhere a new type of worker which has a minimum set of rights and a high degree of flexibility? And does it fit all working arrangements? Or it fits some arrangements that are more technical and have more contractual powers than others? Our discussion, for once, about employment law does affect how society works in the wider sense, because you cannot say, let's think about new ways of working without adjusting all that's around it to it. But that's a way too difficult reflection for me, for sure. For us, maybe what we can look at is what happens within the borders of a company. So having said that, I will hand over to Alessandro, that from a very traditional business like the insurance one can tell us how this new quest for flexibility and new rules and definition is affecting HR management and the business at large.
Thanks, Marco. Hello, everybody. In general, I believe in a flexible work system because it's valid for all business sector. But at the same time, each business is based on different logics. Clearly, today, I'm focusing on the insurance sector and on bank assurance, which has a business model on very traditional and structured logics, as you know. For example, we are also subject to controls and oversight by a specific regulator, focused on ensuring overall compliance and on preserving the interests of our customers. And so in our field, we also need to take into account that there are very specialized figures in our sectors. I'm thinking actuaries, risk managers, auditors, for example, who are the, for risk manager, who are the engine for the calculation of insurance risk and for its prevention. Now, given the complexity of our business, most of our employees are employed on permanent contracts. To be fair, we see this as a strength rather than a weakness. I strongly believe that we need people to be loyal and motivated. And for this reason, we invest heavily in training, and we also are interns with an eye to permanent recruitment longer term. With COVID, however, a lot has happened, change happened, and there is no going back, I'm afraid. All of us, no one excluded, are already part of this work revolution. So even our entities are not immune to do this. Before the virus last year, we introduced a smart working, for example, a smart working pilot involving a small number of employees. Back then, agile work was still in the testing phase and was not yet implemented, not for all employees. It was an option with very limited use. The pandemic changed everything. Having the most historical rules. In 2 weeks, we were able to secure all of our people, and no smart working became the way of working in this emergency situation. For an important part of our employees. Smart working, or should I say remote working, because because probably we have to consider that not everyone can work by objective, and not all the criteria for a real smart working are applied in general. I was saying remote working has brought a disruptive revolution, but is not changed some of the fundamental of our rules, human resource rules. Let me give an example. On lockdown, we continue to hire. And what's more, we continue to hire on long-term basis. We hire young people, and this shows that today, the gig economy model applied to the workforce has not yet completely reached the insurance sector, our sector. On the other side, I believe that in the medium to long term, the need for figures such as temporary managers to solve contingent issues may increase. But at the same time, to guarantee the business continuity and maintain our service levels, we need an increasingly specialized workforce with strong loyalty, and this take time to build. Remote work in practice will increasingly now grow, and this concept will be more and more linked to personal empowerment, and will eventually develop into performance measurement based on objectives. This is an ongoing but unfinished process, I think, and productivity is fundamental for us. So the evolution of works, in my view, must necessarily include a performance management system in which everyone has their own objectives assigned. So it will be important to accelerate the reskilling plan. And by this, I mean updating skills to assess new tasks related to Industry 4.0 and to future technologies. But it will also be important, in my view, to transform the concept of learning into a learning as agility, which means the ability to adapt, to change, and to react to unforeseen events. For this reason, I think I like to call it flex agility, a word that sums up the concept of flexibility and agility. Adapting quickly to change does not mean upsetting the existing. It does not mean changing what works. We don't see ourselves investing in temporary workforce, but we want to continue to invest in people in a more flexible, agile way.
Thanks very much, Alessandro. Very interesting. You see, we started from a new word that was gigization, and we're ending on another new word that is flexagility. Let me take quickly a question for Miguel, which came through the platform. I'm reading it. In most cases, question from Luis, in most cases, a key concern for companies willing to use gig economy type organizations is the challenge of false entrepreneurship cases. So the contract's been challenged as spoof. Many large companies has faced lawsuits on this. How do you consider this at global jurisdiction where this area remains a bit gray? Thank you. Over to Miguel.
Thank you very much for your question. I think that our position here is this is not the general or the global trend. As I said in my first intervention, it especially has a lot of noise in South Europe countries and especially Spain. There is something that is like a paradox that the country where we started our business is the country where the judicialization or the court and labor inspections activities are higher. There is no country like that. Our position here is we always consider the legal framework where we operated. We are not free riders. And we normally validate not only our legal team, is especially the work from the tech and the operational team of Globo is key for that purpose, is to adapt our operations according to the self-employee regime. And in those countries where there is a higher legal uncertainty, we try to work and collaborate with regulators from one side to explain our model and also to help and to be part of the more consistent regulatory and legislative work, which is at the end the kind of solutions that we need for this legal debate, just to find a right legal framework for all the parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miguel. And it looks like we have 4 minutes and 4 panelists. So that's a very nice fit. Let's everyone just leave this with a phrase or a concept to take home and start thinking again. Roman, you're up first.
Thank you, Marco. In 1 minute, I'd say that sticking to old regulations, to old paradigm, to new situation is not a good idea. Employment and labor law is something to help both employers and employee make their work, be protected and be efficient. If the working scene and the needs, not just regarding the on-demand needs before the pandemic, but even after the pandemic, are not regulated specifically to find a successful solution, we are discussing about words and making companies less effective and making service less fruitful. So I think it's very important to forget about old times, old situations, and without forgetting the need to protect and the need to give also the employees sufficient compliance with the need of life or protection. It's also very important to adapt to new realities. Employment law always has done it and has to do it again beyond words or very radical positions. And thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Miguel.
I think that the impact of these platforms is very cross-sectional. We should be considering from a regulatory standpoint what are the types of impacts that we are generating, because in many occasions the debate is only about labor, but there is some other elements like local commerce, restoration, digitalization. So the role of platforms is cross-sectional, as I said. This is very important to define the right policies and the right regulations. And I think, and I do believe that from an European perspective, with this idea of tech responsible companies, we need to work in a new social contract, taking, as Roman was saying, in consideration the competitiveness of our economy and also the idea to create a better framework where social rights are clear, protective, but also the flexibility is considered as a positive tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandro. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Ah, they're now 20. Alessandro?
In my view, from HR perspective,
Just one final word.
Yeah, thanks. In my view, from HR perspective, a cultural change is needed. As I said before, flex agility is the answer from my view, especially if we think of the new generation who are used to freedom and flexibility and will enter the world of work in a few years. So it's important to look for new solutions. And like I said before, there is no going back. The digital revolution, in my view, is not arriving. It has arrived. Thank you.
Thank you. And for me, the parting thought is thank you, and let's speak again soon, because we will need to speak and learn again and use what we already know. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to the panelists, and have a great seminar that's coming right after us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Marco. We have now reached the end of the session, but the Legal HR Summit is not over yet, as we have many other sessions coming up today. On your screens, you can see the titles of the next simultaneous sessions. If you wish to join, you can register on the Legal HR Summit website. I have left the link in the chat. Even if you cannot attend, you can still register, and we will send you the recording after the event. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending this session, and thanks also to our panelists for their great insights. So with that, this session will now be ending. I hope to see you all at the next one. Bye-bye.